Jane Dysart and Rebecca Jones. Dysart and Jones are always the sponsors of these SLA Canada Zoom events. And of course, our own Jane Dysart is our primary programmer for our SLA Canada unit. Just a reminder, if you're not a member of SLA Canada, please, when you renew your SLA membership, don't forget to check off the box saying you want to be a member of the Canadian community. We're very open to new ideas, new suggestions, new people at the table. You're always welcome at our board meetings and, of course, at all of these collaborative webinars where we love to get together and chat. So with that, I would like to turn it back to Jane, and thank you again.
Thank you very much. And just so you know, we are recording this, and we do have this on YouTube and as a podcast following the event, so that you can share with all of your friends. This particular session started when we were having conversations about government libraries, and we're seeing one of the provincial libraries in Canada disappear. And it started us talking about the fact that we needed to know more about, government libraries and government information flows and how they share knowledge, and how we as special librarians and information professionals can support our various governments. And so we have a number of speakers from Ottawa, but I'm going to let all of our speakers give themselves a little introduction, tell you about what they're doing, and then they're going to talk a little bit about what they see as information flows and knowledge sharing within some of the organizations that they've worked in. So I'm going to start with Iain Watt, because Iain is in Edinburgh, and we're thrilled to have him with us rather. And he is the chair of the IFLA Parliamentary Libraries and Research Group, but he's also worked in European Parliament, for the UN. He was in New York for a while, so he's had a lot of experience, and I want him to tell you a little bit about that as we get started. So over to you, Iain. Give us a little bit about you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Jane. Thanks very much for this invitation. It's a great honor, a great pleasure to be with you on a pretty miserable evening in Edinburgh. We're back in October, as I told Jane. So my presence here is really because of being chair of IFLAPARL, the Parliamentary Library and Research Services of IFLA. But I had, as Jane said, I had about 20-year career in parliamentary libraries, mostly with the European Parliament. The last job was running a research service for some of the committees. I ran the library for many, 12 years or thereabouts. I had a couple of years in New York running the Dag Hammarskjöld Library for the UN. And before parliamentary work, I was with the National Archives in the UK at public libraries, which is where I started, where I got into libraries. I got excited by the idea of connecting people with information. My education background is political science. So I picked up on the advert for this session and what parliaments need. And I think we can divide this whole issue into what's happening in the pandemic and what's happening in terms of everyday life. In the pandemic, some of the main information requirements that parliaments were reporting, this is secondhand, because I'm not actually running a service, but we did a survey across the section to find out what was going on. There was a lot of demand for comparative information. They wanted to know how other countries were responding in terms of policy to the pandemic. They wanted to know how other parliaments were managing their internal affairs. It was quite complicated. You can imagine converting a parliament into a remote working operation, which many of them had to do. And then there was an emphasis on historic information, past pandemics, and very interesting, from a very early date, and politicians were interested in how past economic crises had been managed. They foresaw serious economic crunch at the end of this. It hasn't quite happened yet, at least not around here, but everybody's expecting it. And the other thing was to do with science, the application of science to policy. You would expect that to be normal business, but in a parliament, many parliaments, they're more focused on legal matters. I think the science is actually quite a neglected thing. You can get very big services with no or only one or two scientists involved. So you would think that would be an obvious strength, but it wasn't. And so they developed, some of them at least, cooperative methods of bringing in information from scientific sources. And this was an immediate response to the pandemic. The members wanted, and like everywhere else, they wanted their service delivered flexibly, remotely. And I think libraries were pretty well prepared for that. Not prepared, but they could do it. They were already running in that way. And something that was happening in many places already, but it took on a new emphasis and was spread in more services, was to recycle information that had been prepared for members as public information. So, if the members were getting a briefing on vaccinations, what are the different vaccines, then this could be reused as a public, solid information in the middle of so much nonsense going on out there. And this was reported to have given the services a much higher profile and greatly appreciated by the secretariats and by the members. And this was something also in terms of their performance and keeping services going. Even services, libraries which had no online, found ways to keep going. And it was really quite moving, some of the stories there. Of course, the big question is, does this roll over into everyday life? And in fact, everyday life in parliamentary libraries is much, much more difficult than that, and much more difficult than what they present. The professional representation of how it works is nothing to do with the reality. It is much tougher. Information is not valued in the same way by members, by politicians, as information professionals, and this causes lots of problems. The decision makers' view, this is moving on to the question of how information flows are viewed. The decision makers' view really is that, in general, that library information is marginal, rarely necessary. It's in too high a volume, it's indigestible, it may be a bit behind the curve, and it's not politically usable. And you can look at there's a literature on the use of evidence in policy, and you can find this. I mean, I think government libraries, government administrations, there's more demand perhaps for objective information that can be used for policy making. It's much less in parliaments. Politicians can get information from many, many sources, and they have to make pretty well fast and frugal decisions. They don't need extra input, especially stuff that would require a lot of work to process. And their work is mostly about judgment rather than facts, really. And I think, none of what I've said is intended as a criticism. I think politicians actually do a great job in making these fast decisions. Mostly, as studies have shown, that these fast and frugal decisions can actually be very good. But it's a picture that leaves libraries rather playing a symbolic role as showing that the organization values knowledge. And that's something that is declining. The strength of that kind of myth is declining. Moving on to the last question, which was about how can you get more respect and more value? Well, as I said, I don't know how much this applies to government libraries, but in the parliamentary sector, for the pandemic, there's this credit that's been built up. The big question, does it get rolled on? Many of the people responding to our survey felt that they were likely to face budget cuts in the future because of the likely economic consequences. So no matter how well they have performed, unfortunately, they are a bit afraid that there's going to be a reduction. And the other big question is remote working and online. This is likely to become established and is likely to weaken still further the traditional library, I would say. And my last point, I don't want to take up too much time here, is that I think that what parliamentary libraries need to do in terms of adding value and gaining respect is to actually understand what value means in their organizations and focus on that value. And it's not at all what the traditional service does or presents itself as how it as it should operate. It's actually something completely different. It's much more customized and got to be thought through for individual organizations, which is something I did in the European Parliament and again in the UN, and I'll happily answer questions about that afterwards. But I stop there. Thank you.
Wow, that's fantastic, Iain. You just you just put everything so eloquently. You are a wonderful person to start us off, and we will come back to that question about value once we've talked to our other panelists as well. Elizabeth, would you like to go next? Elizabeth is with the federal government libraries network as well as Statistics Canada. So tell us a little bit about you and your thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. And would this be a good time for me to share my slides as well?
Sure.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Jane. So my name is Elizabeth Nash, and I'm with the Statistics Canada Library, and as well I am also with the CFLSN, or the Canadian Federal Library Strategic Network. So I do have a few slides to share. So I'll just share my screen right now. And so Iain was talking about value. And so this is something that I would like to pick up a little bit. Can you see my screen right now, the PowerPoint? Perfect. Great. So essentially, value is kind of a little bit like a puzzle. And for each organization, the puzzle looks a little bit different. And so with that, what I kind of wanted to talk about today was the puzzle of what makes up value at the StatCan library. So you've already heard a little bit about me. Today, mainly, I'll be focusing on my role at the StatCan library. So here we have the four main puzzle pieces of what I would say make up value at our library. One of the biggest ones is senior management buy-in, which I'll go into a little bit more detail later on. Our research and our library services do make up the bread and butter of what we do, and we have had to adapt these to this new pandemic reality. Not only is proving value hard, but proving value in a pandemic is even harder. Client relations are obviously very important. We do want our clients to come back and to be repeat clients. And in terms of outreach, sometimes I do kind of feel like the little man in the picture here with the speakerphone, trying to get people's attention. So with senior management, they won't know what we do unless we tell them. So we are fortunate in that we do have weekly meetings with our assistant director. And as well, we do have the chance to talk to our director as well with weekly management meetings. So with that, we can let them know what's on our plate, both the big things and the small things, but most importantly, our successes. And that leads into the second part about promotion. I would refer to this as sending up successes. Essentially, every time we get a thank you at the library, we'll forward it up. So if I get a thank you, I would forward that on to my supervisor, who sends it to the library chief, who sends it to the assistant director and the director. That way, senior management can directly see that the clients do value us for the work that we do. And that way, they can get a sense of the various types of tasks and projects that we work on. This leads into the third part of looking for links. Essentially, anytime we can, we try to provide a link between what we do at the StatCan library with the broader outputs of Statistics Canada as a whole. So for example, every year Statistics Canada releases its departmental results report, which is something every department does. It's a pretty longish report. It's about 60 pages, and essentially it's a review of the accomplishments of the past year. So what we do is we go through and we pull out quotations that we know that we've had an impact on. So I just have 3 examples here, but our actual report is about 2 pages long. Anything in quotation marks is directly from the departmental results report, and then anything underneath it is how we've influenced that. It's a bit of a no-frills approach, but we found that senior management really responded well to it because it was a direct link between what we do and the broader outputs of Statistics Canada. So for example, a biblioscan is one of our research projects, and often these biblioscans go into these larger projects. By having this all in one report, it's easy for senior management to see that we do have value and that we can prove that even during the pandemic. So we saw earlier a little bit about biblioscans. Essentially, we do try to balance custom research with larger trends at the library. So biblioscans are done on a custom basis, whereas info guides are curated lists of resources on particular topics. So for example, if someone comes to us and says, hey, you know, do you have books on Python, the coding language? We can say, yep, you know, here's our list. So not only does that save us time, but it saves time for the client as well. Trending Now is an article that we write on a bi-monthly basis, and it covers a hot topic that is popping up in the media lately. So for example, we just did one on the care economy. In terms of our orientations, we really had to pivot with the pandemic. Before they were offered in person, now they're online. We did have to switch the time to offer them a little bit later in the day so that, you know, people on the West Coast weren't waking up at 6 a.m. to attend these orientation sessions. As well, we do offer them just in smaller groups, such as for teams, as well as for specific resources, such as EBSCO products or Factiva. Our overall goal is to help clients access resources that they might not know even exist. So for example, in our physical library, we had a reading room with magazines and journals. We tried to recreate that in a virtual space. It's just a page on our website. So we have links to our most common newspapers like the Globe and Mail, the Hill Times, the Harvard Business Review. These resources might otherwise be lost in a database. So we've tried to pull out the most popular ones and put them in one easy location. Client relations is really at the heart of what we do. Government workers do need accurate information quickly, and they usually need it yesterday. So with that, we have tried to pivot to offer more resources online. We were fortunate in that we wrapped up a 7-year project right before the pandemic hit, and we've already digitized all of these Statistics Canada historical publications. We also just purchased a subscription with Overdrive, so that way we can get books to clients almost immediately instead of having to go into the building and mailing them out. We do also have to be flexible because clients might need assistance at any point in the research process. So for example, if it's the beginning, we might need to help them with a biblioscan to get an idea of the lay of the land of the academic literature. If it's at the end of the project, they might need a citation search to see who has cited this article that they've written. No matter what, we need to be prepared to help them no matter where they are. Something that's been really helpful for us is asking clients what they want us to buy. So with Overdrive, we went to our catalog and we ran a report of the users who have checked out the most books. We then emailed them and said, you know, hey, what type of books do you want to see in Overdrive? And the clients loved it. They felt like they were librarians, you know, they felt like they were going shopping for books, and they loved the experience. And, you know, they said, thank you, you know, here's the books I want. And so with that, not only are we working on that client relations side of things, but we also know that the books we're buying, they're going to be checked out. And that's important for us to make sure that the books we are buying are going to be read. Finally, outreach. This is one of my favorite things. So with this, every time we get an email about an event or an initiative, my first thought is how can we insert ourselves into this? So as an example, we recently had an event called the Dragon's Cave. So it's kind of like a Shark Tank-like event, and the topic was anti-harassment. So essentially groups would come together and create an idea that would be presented to the chief statistician and the assistant chief statisticians. So the library came together and we created a book club called Beyond the Book. So the books we choose have to do with communication, teamwork, anti-harassment, things like that. So the book club was one of the winners of the event, but it also promoted the library. We had a lot of people come out and it was a great success. Around the American election, we also held a news literacy workshop talking about how to spot fake news. We also have monthly library link articles. It's almost like a blog. And with that, we talk about something bigger that's going on at the library, maybe a trend. In terms of our information technology books, again, we went to the people who use our IT collection the most, and we asked them, as a librarian, I'm not using coding languages myself. So someone who works in IT, they will see the trends before I do. So we do like to go to them to ask what type of books they're looking for. As you know, it is a census year. So we did just put together a photo gallery about censuses past. We do a bi-monthly newsletter called the Book Report. We also like to partner with the Statistics Canada Professionals Network. So we do have a fun event going on next week called Who Wants to Be a Librarian? And so with that, the first half is going to be an orientation session about services and resources at the library. And the second half is going to be a trivia game covering what we just talked about in the first half of the orientation. The winner of that will be able to choose a book to purchase in Overdrive. So the goal of that is to not only introduce people to the library, but also to promote this new service that we've just purchased. We also participated in their student carnival in the pre-pandemic days, where we would have brochures and pamphlets to hand out to students. All that to say, those 4 main topics are how we really try to prove value at the library. And each special library is going to be a little bit different with how value is proven, but those 4 have been useful for us. So some of you might have seen this picture before. This used to be the view from my apartment where the StatCam building was lit up as a heart. Right now it's actually lit up in a big check mark for the census. And I like both, although I really like the heart, because at the end of the day, you know, these are strange times, but it will get better. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them after everyone has spoken, or as well, you can email me or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That's terrific. And now I'd like to turn things over to Meagan, who is in digital strategy at Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. So welcome, Meagan. Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, thank you. So I do my background, just a little bit of my background of myself. So as in the circle of libraries, I did my master's of library and information science, but I do information management. So as an information professional, I kind of took all the skills I learned and all the different skill sets of being a librarian. I've really been able to apply them in what I do. My background is in political science. So my life was always in government in one way or another, as far as interest went. And I took on actually my first role with the government was with the Canadian Border Services Agency over 10 years ago as a student. So I found my way back in a weird circle to immigration and really enjoying it. All that to say, I was really struck by kind of what Iain said. And I think what relates to my job is very much the pre-pandemic and the post-pandemic reality of my job. And really what a huge focus of what I do is managing our information within IRCC, which is a huge task. But it also is quite a few other things, as far as I have my hands in many pies, as far as being supports to our privacy folks, our IT security folks, our IT groups, our ATIP groups. So all these different places and information flows where information is constantly moving through an organization, and making sure that I am there supporting a lot of our different groups. And so for me, most of my clients are internal to organization and being able to enable them. So when we talk about value, it's what I can do in supporting them to reach their goals, their strategic objectives for their groups. And so I really have to meet them at their level. And so for me, a lot of the skill sets that have been really beneficial is understanding that information flow from the life cycle management part of beginning to end, which now with pandemic, we were already sort of moving into a digital environment. And that really went into warp speed with COVID-19 and the working from home, and the objectives of our senior management really got to, okay, we have to still hit our objectives, but we have to do so from home. How do I do that? So it was helping them really kind of get these solutions in place that was going to be able to do what they needed to do while still safeguarding and protecting that information and being the stewards that we need to be as owners of custodians of information of our citizens and people looking to be citizens in our case. So it's quite a bit of thought that's been going on, and it's definitely been interesting under the different kind of challenges that we've had, but digitization has been a huge piece of that. Digitalization, so actually creating processes. So all these different things that we did in the nature of work, how do we make those digital? So kind of working with groups on that and being able to essentially facilitate that ability, as well as collaboration. So a big piece of what we do as librarians is how do we get information to people? People are always looking for information. Elizabeth, you said government workers need information yesterday. But and they need it to be up to date. They need it to be factual. They need to make sure that it has integrity. And so how do we do that? How do we enable our systems to be able to do that effectively? And again, safeguarding those kind of backstream channels of privacy and security, and ensuring that we have that information there for litigation and ATIP. I work for IRCC. We are the most ATIP'd and litigated department in all of the government of Canada. It's a huge, huge issue for us. So it's one of those things where we really wanted to make sure we safeguard that. So it's been quite a bit. I would say the other skill sets that are helpful that I have, ATIP, sorry, yes, ATIP is access to information and privacy requests. If you're in the provincial language, that would be an FOI or a freedom of information request. So anybody within Canada can request to access any information that we have within the government. There's a few exemptions or exclusions based off of certain things within the Act, but otherwise it's all fair game. So that has been quite interesting, especially as, you know, we move from our digital systems that we have, moving into our email, all these different kind of collaborative workspaces like Zoom and others that we're all sort of having to move to kind of keep work going. What does it look like to be able to safeguard that information and make it available and searchable for everyone? So being able to be a good kind of the reference librarian of meeting with these groups and speaking many languages. I'm now somewhat fluent in IT and legal, and I'm still learning a few other languages as I go. But it's being able to prove, I mean, again, it's also proving myself every time, right? So I'm constantly tested. Am I gonna be able to kind of meet the moment? I'm gonna be able to meet the objectives of that team and be able to facilitate. IAM's a fun one where sort of our legacy understanding is we were kind of the don't do that group. And now we're much more of a here's how we can help you group more so. So it's a transition of even how our internal clients look at us. And so we are constantly in a way being tested. We have to prove ourselves that we are of value to them and be able to showcase that. Some cases, it's not always easy to be able to measure those outputs for ourselves, but a lot of times it's aligning with their outputs and their objectives to be able to show, did we help them meet that? So it's, there's quite a bit there. There's, you know, senior management they're under a lot of pressure. So they look to us a lot of times to say, you know, give us the solutions that are gonna, you know, hit those risk mitigation points, but are gonna be able to allow us to get our jobs done. So that's a lot of what I do. I'm sure will be questions. But yeah, I think that's a good introduction to start.
That's great. Thanks, Meagan. It's really interesting. And, you know, everyone sort of has a different aspect, but it's great to hear. And Susan now is more in the knowledge management side of things. So tell us a little bit more about you and what you do, Susan.
Yes, great. Thanks a lot, Joan. And thank you for including me on this panel. I put up a slide, and hopefully it'll come up. Yeah, you may think that I'm a Mary Kay representative, but no, that wasn't my intent. Yeah, so it's a little bit different. It's really interesting to hear the different perspectives. And when I heard people talking, I thought, oh, I could have taken a different tack to what I'm going to do. But really what I want to talk about is the skill sets that information management and librarian professionals have that I think are completely apt for the environment that we're in. I started my career as a special librarian in defense research and development about 100 years ago. And I did retire from the federal civil service after a while. And in the last few years, I've been doing some consulting work related to knowledge management. My last 20 years or so of my career was in the area of knowledge management, and so it's kind of fun to be able to keep doing that today. So just to start quickly, what I wanted to talk about is how knowledge management and information management can enable digital transformation. And digital transformation, of course, is the latest that we're dealing with in the federal government in Canada, and I imagine it's not just us, it's probably across the board. And when we say digital transformation, what we're talking about is how to modernize or optimize or even revolutionize our work through technology. And when I talk about information management, I'm talking about how we manage the codified stuff. And we all know how to do that. Knowledge management takes that, but it takes more than that. It talks about tacit information as well as the explicit or tacit knowledge as well, the explicit. So it's a bigger spectrum, if you like. If you look up at the top, I'm going to start at 12 o'clock. And just to say that really what we're dealing with is a very complex digital ecosystem. And what it requires is it requires a lot of collaboration, and it requires a lot of multidisciplinary work. It needs good governance, and it needs information management and what information management can bring to it. So we've already heard in the first speakers those themes, so we know that that's a reality. The interesting thing is nobody is an expert in everything, and nobody can be an expert, and we can't train people to be experts in everything. Recently, I heard a woman by the name of Frances Karamouzis from Gardner Group call the kind of people we need unicorns. So unicorns are those people you can't find, right? They have a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this. You can't find those people. So what you have to do is you have to find people who can do a little bit of one thing, but are capable and open to learning about the other things. So that's the important thing about where we're going. And the IM professionals have a lot of skills that they can bring to the table. And I can list those, but they're familiar to you. You know, we know all about information and data architectures. We know about user-centric design and databases and designing databases and information system design. We know about data science and data mining. Classification systems from all angles. We learn about resource management. I think we're pretty good at that. About information lifecycle management, retention, disposition, and more. And we know how to research those things that we can't, that we don't know about right now, but we know where to find them. And that in itself is a huge skill. When we turn towards knowledge management, there are things that people who have been trained in that area bring to the table as well. And that has a lot to do with our understanding of how knowledge is shared. We can facilitate those kind of interactions. We know about knowledge lifecycle management because it does have life cycle management, just like information. We understand about learning, continuous learning, and organizational learning and personal learning. But what I think we really bring to the table from our IM backgrounds is all about taxonomies and ontologies and how those are applied to so many of the challenges that people are dealing with in the digital workplace now. As well, we understand epistemology and how we can make intelligence out of what information and knowledge that we have. So we have a lot to bring there. But there are other skills in the expertise toolkit as well. We heard a little bit about that, but they're no surprise to you. They evolve and they become important as we move along. Privacy, security are two of the big ones these days. Ethics, particularly as they exist within the artificial intelligence areas. There are always new technologies and new languages to learn, as Meagan said. And there are personal skills that we have to evolve as well. And those are really in the areas of personal agility and resilience. And those aren't just words, those are ways of living and ways of working. And we have to take care of ourselves, but we have to not be too hard on ourselves as well. And finally, which the purple circle, which I think is actually probably one of the most important things, because if you're this, and if you develop these skills, you'll be able to do the other. And that is that you have to be an open and curious person. You have to be a lifelong learner. And you have to have a holistic worldview so that you can span boundaries. Meagan told you about spanning boundaries, but I heard examples in Elizabeth and Iain's presentations as well. And finally, what that means is there are two things that we have to be as individuals. We have to be empathetic and we have to be humble. We have to have the humility to understand that we don't know everything, and that even if we do know something, we can learn more. We have to be able to be empathetic as well. We have to be able to walk in other people's shoes or other people's moccasins in order to come up with the best solutions. So finally, what I just like to say is that I believe that we have the skill sets for digital transformation in the government and in other places, and I think we just have to make sure that we position ourselves so that people can see that and take advantage of it. So thank you for
That's fantastic, Susan. Thank you so much. You just brought all of those skills to the forefront. That's really wonderful. I was talking with Rebecca the other day about an article that I follow Vince Cerf, and he popped up this Wired magazine article that was basically about COVID and how something was not correct way back when, but kept going forward. But to me, the fascinating part of the article was even more the information flow and how it was shared and how the scientists were working. And, even some of the terms that they used was around, tracking back the research, the citation tracking, but they called it citation forensics. I thought, wow, what a great term that is. But, it's wonderful, that we can create unicorns that have all of these different kinds of skills. And it's the making sure that our stakeholders know that we have those skills. And that's one thing I don't think we are good at. Our friend Stephen Abram, who's in the audience here, has often said, that if we were like lawyers, they would know all of those different skills that we had because we'd be charging for them. But at any rate, I wanna open it up for our audience to ask questions in the chat, if you would, and also to let you guys respond to each other. Iain, do you want to go ahead with further comments about value and what our other panelists have said?
Right, yeah. Well, I was struck by Elizabeth's opener with value. I thought that everybody's going to think that we stitched it up together, that it was going to be about value, but actually we had no consultation whatsoever. I think, yeah, I said I could add a bit more about value, and I think I want to throw some thoughts out that probably won't be terribly welcome. And one thing, that conclusion I came to after 20 years working in parliamentary libraries, was that basically clients are a dangerous distraction, and that client satisfaction is a very misleading and dangerous thing to focus on. And that listening to client feedback leads to complacency and more danger. And I say this because the two main parliamentary libraries I work for, both came under question repeatedly as to why they should still exist. I arrived at the European Parliament to be the head of the library, to be told that they were looking at shutting it down. When I got to the UN, it was a service that had started off with almost 200 people and was down to 60 something and was being questioned more. And these were fantastically client-focused services. They were really, really good with the clients. They did everything for the clients. The clients were really, really happy, but it made absolutely no impact on the decision makers in the organization. And I had a bit of a time in both organizations, both services, trying to persuade the librarians, who are so good and so focused on their clients, that they had to be a bit more ruthless and say, you know, if we're not in business, then we can't actually serve these people. We have to actually take the steps to survive. And that means looking at what decision makers consider to be valuable and addressing that first, so that we actually get the permission to stay in business. So there you go. I think clients are a dangerous distraction.
So Iain, would you say that looking at some of the non-clients, the people who aren't using the services and the kinds of things that they need, is one way or not?
I think, yeah, it's a question of looking at it in the organization. In terms of the parliament, what you can see is that for most decisions, only a handful of members are actually using detailed information, and they're in many cases already expert in the subject. If you're broadcasting to everybody, you're probably not really doing anything very useful. What you have to do is to focus your information on these gatekeepers who will actually influence the others. And in many cases, what they're after actually really is information to confirm a position. They're not after information to tell them anything. I really remember that in the European Parliament, we started producing briefings, very short 4-page briefings on a policy topic, which nobody else had been doing. There was a research department, but they were producing 100-page documents. So we started producing these 4-page things. And I went to visit one of the members who was a real expert on a topic. And he pulled out our briefing on it from his briefcase. And he said, it's brilliant. I said, why do you know all this? Yeah, but I use it with the other members. I say, look, this is the information. So it's a way of adapting. In the UN, I mean, we were never going to get the delegates to actually use the library. So we had to look at, okay, what could we actually tell the delegates about we had to put ourselves in the shoes of the delegates. What information would be actually of value to them? How would they use it? So for example, one of the things we considered was not, the kind of nitty-gritty stuff that the library help desk was providing information on, but they actually wanted information that would allow them to impress the people back home and also to persuade other delegates. So you have to look at how can we get to the delegates and tailor the information. I didn't stay long. I was only there a couple of years. Didn't stay long enough to really get it done. We actually started to have meetings with UN committees about library services, which had never happened, I think, before. We started to have some impact there. In the European Parliament, we were working on, working more with individual members and their offices as a kind of, looking at it as a small business, and the ones that were most active in the policy, to actually work directly with them and to provide them with a very customized service for information. And that was therefore visible, much more visible to the member. So it was kind of also providing value to them, but also value in terms of the library showing that it was relevant. And the European Parliament story was, I mean, it ended up, I didn't benefit from it, but it actually went to a much bigger organization. I started with 50 something staff, and when I left, it was 120, and it's now much bigger, 200 or 300 people working in research and information in that area.
Yeah.
So there we are.
Well, you made a difference there for sure. Yeah, you did.
Jane, there was a question in the chat about if any of the panelists had done an ROI, and Susan has. Susan, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can. I think this is a non-trivial problem, trying to find out what value is, right? And but it's so important. It's so so very important. Although I do remember in the mid 1990s when we went through, or the early 90s when we went through the first really horrible cuts in the federal government. We found a beautiful document that told us about the value of library services and how much money organizations saved by using them. And of course, it made no difference, right? So it goes back to what Iain's talking about decision makers, right? They make their decisions, but it doesn't mean that they make their decisions based on things like that. They often make them based on many other factors. So just to quickly talk about the work that we did, I worked for, I was the knowledge manager for, after 9/11, there was a public safety anti-terrorism budget, and there was a lot of money that went into the federal government and industries and first responders across the country. And so what we did was when we did the when we had to do an evaluation, it was required. You had to do a summative, a formative, two evaluations. And so what we did was we used results-based. I can't even remember the name of the it's not in vogue anymore, but it's just as valuable today. So it's about results-based. So you essentially you figure out what your outcomes are, your long-term, your medium-term, and your short-term outcomes, and then you look at you devise activities that will lead to those outcomes. And so what happened was we were able to devise activities and then measure those activities to see whether or not they impacted the outcomes. And the evaluators were able to say, for example, we developed this piece of kit for whatever it was. And if this goes into service, this would save this many lives. And at that time, Stats Canada was saying a life was worth $4 million or something like that, right? Like it was, that's kind of crass, but that's the way it was. Results based on outcomes. I took that a step further with our knowledge management activities and worked with Kim Dalker at McGill and a couple of her grad students. And we measured activities like communities of practice and a platform that we used for collaboration. And we asked people, if you hadn't, simple things like this, I'm oversimplifying at the moment, but if you hadn't have had this community of practice, or can you think of an example where the community of practice increased your knowledge about a certain thing and what that was? And then to quantify that, we would say, okay, if you hadn't have had the community of practice, how would you have learned it? And then how many years would it have taken you, and so on and so forth. So in the end, you have a story about the value of a community of practice, but you also are able to quantify it into cost. So it's either zero, we never would have done it and we never would have been ahead, or it would have cost us this many years and this many grad students and this many and so forth. And then you have an amount. So then you can actually put a number on the activity. So we did that. It was a number of years ago that I did that. And I'm actually hoping, I'm working on an initiative right now, and I'm actually hoping to come up with some measures where we can say, let's measure it to see if we're able to do this thing. So it's related to collaboration in digital transformation. And then we'll do that as a pilot and we'll try to measure it within 6 months. If it doesn't work, I'm going to disappear and you'll never find me again. So there you go.
Well, good luck with that. And we want to hear more about that in the future. I'm going to ask, Elizabeth and Meagan, do you have other follow-up, comments or insights that you want to share at the moment?
I think for us to talk about this value aspect of it, for us, measurement has really been important because we do have to back up what we do with the numbers. And so with that, every time we get any type of request, whether it's a member of the public, whether it's a federal employee, whether it's someone at Statistics Canada, we do keep track of that, and we do keep good records of the types of questions we get, whether they're short reference questions or if they're longer and more in depth. And so with that, we do have a good sort of worldview of how much we can help people. And we do also keep track of the time that we spend on these questions so that we can do wrap-up reports that say, you know, we've spent X amount of hours on this, you know, one project. So with that, we can prove, you know, just how much we are providing to, you know, both citizens and to the government. With that, we've noticed that some of our reports are being forwarded on to people like TBS or the Treasury Board Secretariat. And so that's been very fortunate for us that, you know, they can see the work that we do. Iain, I loved the use of the word ruthless, because I do think that we really do have to be okay with, you know, self-promotion and tailoring what we do to each person. You know, if you're applying for a job, you know, you don't use the same CV for each position, you know, you change it for each one. And I think with that, we do try our best to, you know, whether it's a team, whether it's an individual person, a key stakeholder, we try to think, you know, what do they want and how can we deliver to them in what best package? So I think that all wraps together, you know, whether it's with numbers, whether it's testimonials, we try to get to them how they want to be, you know, how they want to receive that message. So it really depends on the situation and context, but we will try to meet them wherever they want to meet.
Excellent, excellent. How about you, Meagan? Further comments?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think we struggle with that in IM a lot, with this kind of like, how do we measure ourselves and tell our stories? Rebecca's going to know about this because she's been working with our group on how better to do that. Because in IM, it's difficult not to say, okay, how do we measure ourselves? Well, how many files did we destroy this year? You know, based off their retention, and you know, how many people attended our training on this? Like, are those good measurements of really what our impact is? They're a measurement of what our impact is, but they don't really tell the full story of what we do. And in some circumstances, like we quite often, any kind of major projects that come down IRCC, they kind of, you know, they generally go through sort of like what we call an intake process. And so where it's all the different sort of stakeholders within the group have an opportunity to sort of jump in and say, oh, here's things that are going to pertain to me that you're going to need my expertise on, kind of thing. And we go through an actual practice where we say, this is actually the amount of resources you're going to require from our team to actually manage this. So it's like, you know, it's one of those things too, where they're like, okay, well, we've said it's, you know, essentially it's a costing, right? This is how many people you will need, say it's full-time employees, or how much work is going to be required to do this review. So, you know, and then ultimately, is the project successful? Was it worth, you know, what we said we were going to do? So in some ways we get measured that way against the project, and that's sort of with the client. In some ways it's measurements as well to, you know, TBS reporting to our central agencies of what is required from IM. Are we hitting those measurements? So there's quite a few that go on. For me, I'm also really, my biggest thing when we talk about promotion is I'm looking for word of mouth. And I'm looking to have my IM, I call them kind of my IM ambassadors, like embedded IM ambassadors. I want to be able to, I've essentially shown my worth within the group, and that my team was able to do that. And we were able to facilitate a project for them in such a way that it is successful for them. Also, you know, keeping everything that I need to as far as my privacy colleagues as well, my security colleagues, right? So I often am kind of the facilitator, I'm the coordinator of groups. So I'll sit there and like, you know, you're going to need this person, this person, this person to get this going. I'll help you out with what I need. And then from there, I've got somebody who's saying, this was really great. IM was fantastic. They helped me reach this goal. You should contact them because they're going to help you. And that actual word of mouth is really helpful in government, because you tend to know, you know, it starts off as a person, but eventually you can bring your team in. And that idea of, and that understanding of what that team is, because again, people don't always know what IM does either, right? And there's a really kind of, there's an existing way of we manage paper, and we would give files to people when they need them, and we still do that. But so much of it now is enabling collaboration and digitization and the different things, you know, talking about even cataloging for us is metadata. Like what kind of information about data do I need to capture so that people can find what they're looking for? How can I have systems talk to each other in such a way that I'm managing that information flow? It's, you know, it's speaking all those language and sometimes translating that for my other business units as well. that all of those different things are essentially establishing our worth. Are they all measured? No. Should we do a better job of doing that? Yes. But you know, that's something that we have to kind of work towards what that looks like as well. And you know, it really, really helps too when you get DGs and ADMs who really like your work.
Exactly.
Pass that around as well. So
Yeah.
an added bonus when you can get there.
And I like the way you focused on the word of mouth, Meagan, because it's the influencers and the champions that really tell our story better than we do. And I think Iain would probably agree with that too, with you know, those decision makers who you've had an impact with will make a much more of an impact on the others than we could on our own. And I cannot believe that we are down to just minutes again. We have such great conversations and you've all contributed so many wonderful things. I'm glad we recorded it because I know that there are parts I'm going to want to listen to again. And if you have things you want to connect more, we have our SLA Canada group on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on our website for SLA, but the LinkedIn and the Facebook are open to whomever. And you will be able to hear this, as I say, later as a podcast or on YouTube. And what else do I want to say?
And do join us for a follow-up session on articulating value on June 17th, when we'll have Donna Sheeter, who was, of course, president of IFLA and at the Library of Congress for years, Mary Ellen Bates, who you probably all know, Jim Miller, who is in Ottawa, principal with Connect Public Affairs, and Frank Biss, who runs Counting Opinions, data firm and statistics firm for Canada. See you then.
Thanks, Rebecca, for reminding us about that. Thank you all again. Wonderful. Bye.
Thank you.